everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul, I'm with the Dicey Review, and tonight we're going to be looking at how to play the 3 to 5 player game Calimala, being released by Stronghold Games. Calimala comes with all of the components that you see here, including player components in 5 different colors. Player components include wooden discs, wooden cubes, wooden ships, and wooden trade houses. There will also be a 50 victory point tile in each player color. The game also comes with 5 player mats, 1 game board, 8 action tiles, 15 scoring tiles, 10 workshop tiles, 10 white wooden discs, 1 active player token, 10 final scoring cards, and 45 action cards. To begin setup, place the board in the middle of the table. Next, give each player the player mat and player components in the color of their choice. Each player will receive 40 cubes, 3 ships, 3 trade houses, and 2 neutral workshop tiles. Each player will place the 50-point marker in their player color next to the 0 scoring space of the scoring track. Give each player a number of scoring discs in white and their player color depending on the player count. In our 3-player example, each player will receive 12 discs of their color and 3 white discs. Then each player places 1 extra disc of their color on the 0 space of the scoring track. The youngest player will go first. Give this player the active player token. Take the 8 action tiles and place them face up in the corresponding spaces of the city grid. In the first game, this is the recommended setup. In future games, these tiles can be shuffled and placed randomly. Next, shuffle the 15 scoring tiles and place them in the city council spaces. Shuffle the scoring card deck and deal out a number of scoring cards to each player depending on the player count. In a 3-player game, each person receives 3 cards. In a 3 and a 4-player game, after dealing each player the required number of cards, 1 card is placed face up next to the board. This card will be scored by all players at the end of the game. In a 5-player game, no card is dealt face up next to the board. Each player selects only 1 of their dealt cards, and the cards that they do not select are placed back in the box without being looked at. The cards that the players select and any face-up card next to the board will score for all players at the end of the game. Next, place 1 copy each of the following 5 action cards face up on the table. Starting with the last player in turn order and then going counterclockwise, each player selects 1 of the face-up action cards. Any action cards not selected are shuffled together with the action card deck, and then this deck is placed face down near the play area. You're now ready to play the game. In Calimala, players will take turns beginning with the start player and then going in a clockwise direction. On a player's turn, they will choose an action disc that they control, either a white disc or a disc of their player color. They will place this disc on an action space in the city grid. All of the action spaces are in between 2 connected action tiles. When a player places their disc on an action space, it will activate the 2 adjacent action tiles, allowing the player to take both of the actions in any order they choose. If there are discs already present on the selected action space, the player still places their disc there, forming a stack. Action discs of a player's color are activated again and resolved by the applicable player after the active player's actions. It's important to note that white action discs are never reactivated. So for instance, after placing their player disc here, the green player would activate these 2 actions, then the red player would activate these 2 actions, and finally the blue player would receive another activation of these 2 actions. If a player chooses to place a white action disc on their turn, they are able to take each of the connected actions twice for a total of 4 actions. Once again, these actions can be taken in any order. If a player is unable to complete one of their actions, they draw an action card as compensation. It's important to note that an active player must always place an action disc in a way that will allow them to take at least 1 action. So essentially, an active player may never place a disc to simply draw 2 action cards. It is important to note, however, that players who have their discs activated by other players are allowed to draw 2 action cards if applicable. If a player places an action disc on a stack and creates a stack of 4, a scoring phase is triggered. We'll explain scoring in a few minutes. After the active player has placed a disc and all relevant discs in a stack have been activated, the active player marker will pass to the player to the left, and this player will then take a turn. This will continue until the game end condition has been met. Now that we've looked at the general overview of a player's turn, let's look at each action in detail. We'll start by looking at the wood, brick, and marble actions. The wood, brick, and marble actions all work in the same way. The player simply takes one of the cubes in their player color from the reserve and places it in a warehouse on the player board matching that resource. The player simply takes one of the cubes in their player color from their reserve and places it in a warehouse on their player board matching that resource for each action taken. So for instance, one brick action would result in one cube in the brick warehouse. One cube in the brick warehouse represents one brick for this player. If a warehouse is full when a player would take this action, they draw an action card instead. Once again, the wood and marble actions work in the same way. Next, let's look at the build action. When taking a build action, a player is able to build either one ship, one trade house, or one workshop per action taken. The costs for building each item are different. To build a ship, a player places 2 wood from their warehouses back into their reserve. They can then place one of the ships from their reserve in the port space of their player mat. To build a trade house, the player removes 2 bricks from their warehouses. They're then able to place a trading house in an open space above one of the trade cities. It's important to note that each player may only have one trading house in each trade city. To build a workshop, a player removes a brick and a wood from each of their warehouses. They can then place a new workshop tile from their reserve on the leftmost open space of their player mat. If a player is unable to perform any of these actions for any reason, they simply draw an action card instead. Next, we'll discuss the artwork action. To complete an artwork action, the player moves 1 cube from their marble warehouse per action taken. They can then place it onto an empty artwork slot next to one of the 3 buildings under construction or in one of the city council spaces. If a player is unable to complete this action for any reason, they will draw an action card instead. Now let's look at the weave action. When taking a weave action, a player may place 1 cube from their reserve in an empty slot in each of their workshops. These cubes represent cloth. It's important to note that a player only places 1 cube in each workshop. So if a player had built all 3 workshops, they would be able to gain 3 cloth with 1 action. If a player cannot complete this action, they will draw an action card instead. Next is the ship action. When taking a ship action, a player may transport as many cloth cubes as they have ships on 1 action. So for instance, with 1 ship action, this player would be able to take up to 2 of the cloth from their workshops and send this cloth to an open space in one of the port cities. Port cities are clearly marked with a ship symbol. Each cube delivered can go to the same city or to different cities. So for instance, this player could have decided to deliver this cloth here and this cloth here. But because of their secret scoring card, they'll deliver both of their cloth to London. It's important to note that a player can decide to send less cubes than they have ships if they want to. And once again, if a player can't take this action for any reason, they will draw an action card instead. Now we'll look at the transport action. When taking a transport action, the player may place 1 cloth from their workshop in each trade city where they have a trade house. This means the player can move up to 3 cubes with 1 action if they've built 3 trade houses. It's important to note that unlike the shipping action, a player can't place 2 cubes in the same city. They have to go to different cities. If a player can't take this action for any reason, they draw an action card instead. Finally, let's discuss the contribute action. The contribute action allows a player to move 1 cube of their choice, either wood, brick, or marble, to a matching empty resource space on one of the 3 buildings under construction. Each of the resource types are clearly labeled under each building. So for instance, if this player decided to contribute 1 wood, they would be able to place a cube on any one of these 3 lines. If a player is unable to take this action for any reason, they'll draw an action card instead. In addition to their activated actions, a player may play any number of action cards from their hand to take the action on the card. Cards can be played when your discs are activated either by your action or the actions of others. Cards can be played either before or after each of your activated actions. Once again, it's important to note that action cards can be played if you are the active player or if your discs are activated by other players. So let's say, for instance, that the green player places their disc here, activating these two actions. The green player decides to first take the weave action, filling up their workshops with cloth. This green player doesn't currently have any resources to take the contribute action, so they decide to play a wood card, giving them one resource. They then use that resource to take the contribute action. The blue player's disc is then activated because it's next in the stack. The blue player's workshops are filled with cloth, and they don't have any resources to take the contribute action. They would be forced to draw two cards. They decide to draw a card for this action first. This drawn card would give them resources. They can immediately use this card to gain the resources and take the contribute action. Once again, you can play action cards if it's your turn or if your actions are activated by other players. There are 15 scoring phases in Calimala, plus a final scoring at the end of the game. When an action disc stack is created that makes a stack of 4 discs, the first 3 discs are activated like normal, but the bottom disc is not activated. Instead, it's sent to the next open space of the City Council. This will trigger a scoring. Discs are placed in the City Council spaces, starting at the top left and then moving down in English reading order. If the bottom disc of a scoring stack is white, the player who triggers the scoring will replace this white disc with a disc of their color. They will place the disc of their color on the next council seat to trigger a scoring. They will then place the newly gained white disc in their reserve. If all of the player discs of this player's color are already out on the board, they must instead replace this white disc with another disc of their color in an action space already placed on the board. The white disc, however, is still placed in their reserve. We'll look at each scoring tile in detail in a moment. After finishing the scoring, the active player marker is passed like normal. If there's ever a tie during scoring, the tied players will add up their seats in the City Council and their contributed artwork to the City Council. If one person has more, the tied player with the highest sum will win the tie. If the total sum is the same, the player with more seats in the City Council is the winner. So in this case, red would be the winner in a tiebreak against green. Green has a sum of 4 seats and artwork. Red also has a sum of 4 seats and artwork, but red has more seats. If both artwork and the sum of seats are tied, the player to have first gotten their seat number total would win the tie. So for instance, both green and red have 3 seats, but red had 3 seats first, so they win the tie. And if the tied players don't have any seats, the first player of the tied players to have contributed artwork will win a tie. Once a scoring tile has been triggered, they will each score in different ways. For each of the city scoring tiles, the players will add up their cloth cubes delivered to the corresponding city. So for instance, in Lisbon, the green player would have the most cubes. In Barcelona, the green and blue player are tied. In London, the red player would have the most cubes, and green and blue would be tied for second. The next scoring tiles are the building under construction tiles. When scoring the building under construction tiles, the players simply add all of their cubes in the corresponding city. So for instance, if scoring Santa Croce, the red player would win for 2 total cubes contributed, and blue would be second. Each city would be scored in this way. When scoring the artwork tile, the players simply add up all of their artwork in each of the 3 buildings under construction and in the City Council. In this example, blue would be first with 3 total art contributed, followed by red and then green. When scoring the Trade Cities tile, the players will add up all of their cubes in only the trade cities. The trade cities are clearly marked with this wagon symbol. When scoring the Port Cities tile, the players will add up all of their cubes in only the port cities. Once again, these cities are clearly marked with a boat symbol. And finally, when scoring the wood, brick, or marble scoring tiles, the players will simply add up all of the contributed cubes in that category at all 3 of the buildings under construction. With each scoring tile, the first 3 players score the following victory points. The player with the most cubes gains 3 points. The player with the second most will gain 2, and the player with third most will gain 1. Each time a scoring happens, move the player markers on the track to notate this. The game will end as soon as one of the following conditions occurs. If players have placed all of the action discs on the city grid, both of the player colors and of the white, in this case the players score any remaining scoring discs in the City Council without getting additional seats. The other game-in scenario is if the players have triggered all 15 scoring tiles. In this case, they will finish the current player round until each player has placed the same total number of discs. After the final round, all players will reveal their scoring cards, and a scoring phase will happen for all players based on each card revealed. Each card will either show one of the 6 cities or one of the 4 buildings under construction. The scoring cards work in the same way as the scoring tiles, with a couple of exceptions. For each scoring card, take the city or building that matches that scoring card, and whoever has the most cubes in this city or building will score the highest victory point total. Whoever is second will score the 3 points, and whoever is third will score 1. As you can see, the points gained are slightly higher than the tiles that you'll score during the game. For the Palazzo Vecchio scoring, each player adds their seats and the contributed artwork cubes in the City Council. This is the only scoring card that scores in this way. All ties for in-game scoring cards are resolved in the same way as the scoring tiles. After all scoring cards are resolved, the player with the most points wins the game. In the case of a tie, the player with more seats and contributed artworks in the City Council is the winner.
Alright everybody, that was our video. Thanks so much for watching. We hope that it was helpful and we hope that it was informative. If you still have any questions about how to play the game, please comment below or email us directly at thedicey@gmail.com. If you want to hear more from the Dicey Review, you can check out the Dicey Review podcast. It can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, SoundCloud, pretty much any podcast app. You can read our written reviews by visiting thediceyreview.com, and make sure and connect with us on social media and at our guild at boardgamegeek.com. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, we'll see you at the table.